I mean, I was kind of talking about Fallout not too long ago because I did a little reaction video. And ever since then, my feed's kind of been full of all sorts of Fallout stuff, and most of it's kind of fan made. This is probably especially relevant because of the Fallout TV show that is, it's just out there butchering everything that ever made Fallout great. And I keep thinking about, where did the people come from who actually invented and created these golden eras of gaming? I feel like, and of course I'm not old enough to remember this, but I feel like when Pong was invented, it kind of laid an egg that burst out with just insane amounts of creativity. But the most interesting part of that part of gaming history is just the people who rose out of there to create what they wanted to. I mean, these guys had a vision, and this was before the invention of the internet, so of course there was still kind of cultural and idea exchange, but it wasn't at such a mainstream mass level as it is now. And these guys not only had an idea or a really cool concept for a game, but they were also able to bring together people to kind of meld the technology of the time. And sometimes they would have to literally invent it. But you have people like, how did Pong lead to Mario exactly? And then you get into people like Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator and the supervisor of the greatest age of Final Fantasy and the entire age of JRPGs. People like him came along. And these people, John Carmack is another one of them. These guys just had some kind of wellspring, some kind of source for all this creativity and especially the ambition. Of course, I was a kid or not even born when they were making the first few Final Fantasies, but as I've played them, it's like each one of them are very unique because they are their own universe, especially under Sakaguchi. That was kind of the point, and it seemed to be kind of effortless back then especially. The technology would evolve and improve upon itself, the combat system would kind of improve, but the storytelling would shift and it would tell different kind of archetypal stories. It was the same hero's journey, but it was just kind of put through different lenses to where it was kind of unrecognizable to people like me. And so that was the time in gaming where you could basically pick up something that was made by one of these guys and you knew it was going to be good. And no matter how much they charged for it, it would basically be worth all your money. And whatever wellspring that these guys were all collectively supping from, I mean, this nourished our entire generation, especially the millennials. Because as the millennials were, taking in all this information, I was there, I remember the time before the internet. It was very, very isolated mentally. You kind of believed whatever people were telling around you. And now, of course, people have gone insane because that's been multiplied, 6 billion, 7 billion fold. But these kind of devs, I feel like they were just a different breed. There are probably some people who are like them, who are around now, but of course they're problematic and they're too brave, they want to take too many risks. So instead of the newest remake of whatever game, they want to make their own thing. And of course that's not acceptable. I mean, these guys were lining up to basically punch the generation that I grew up with in the face with this archetypal knowledge that we were never given in school. And they were throwing crazy religious ideas and philosophical ideas I never even understood until I became an adult. Our brains were being crammed by this kind of stuff, and it was mostly subliminal. I mean, of course they would say it out loud. The themes would be very, very clear if you look at it with an adult lens now. But when you're 6 or 7 years old, playing something that's rated T for teen or M for mature, and something like, StarCraft, that was one of the ones I always talk about where I was watching it. I never played it till I was a little bit older. When I was watching my brother and his best friend play it, I was watching entire armies massacre each other. Blood and viscera, everywhere. And it was so cool to watch. And I remember a little bit of the story. I thought it was so strange that in the end, as my brother's friend was playing the end of Brood War, I thought it was so interesting that this was the first game I saw where you not only act as the main antagonist of a game, but you're so unapologetically evil and conniving, and you end up winning in the end. Just ideas like that were so new to me, and probably new to a lot of us. I'm sure it wasn't just StarCraft for you, but all of us, I think, especially if you're a gamer, from my generation especially, but I'm assuming that a lot of these ideas of like right being right, wrong sometimes winning, the life not being fair, what it means to be a hero, even some of our sexual preferences, our relationship preferences, especially if you're a mentally ill man-child, this stuff was heavily influenced by the games we grew up with. And I think one of the things I miss most about that era of games is not just nostalgia, but if you watch any of these documentaries, especially like the Bungie ones or any of them that have any of the original creators of studios, you know, they took real ownership over the IPs, and if it failed, they took the fall. Especially Sakaguchi, I'm pretty sure he was the one who wanted to do the Final Fantasy movie, which, you know, by the way, it wasn't amazing, but it shouldn't have sunk the entire studio. But he personally took the blame. And, you know, I'm sure if Doom would have failed, I'm sure Carmack and all them, they would have gone out of business. You know, these guys were actual rebels. They were people who were actually had something to say, and they were extremely competent and actually had skill to put on display for us. You fast forward 20, 30 years to today, and it's like not a single dev, and if, you know, some of them are skilled, I'm sure the baseline developers of a lot of these are skilled, but I'm just really not excited for any games that are coming out because everything's already been said and very little of it is unique, especially today. One of the things I saw on my feed, which I'd never heard of, apparently it's been announced a long time ago, is one of the many, of course, the best modders, some of the best modders are in the Bethesda games, and I'd never heard of this, but I live up in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a ongoing fan project called Fallout Cascadia, where they're basically going to be setting Fallout in Seattle, or the greater Seattle area, using the Fallout 4 engine, the Fallout 4 game. So it'll basically be another Fallout London, but set in the United States, which is where it should be. And of course, that's a bit creative, but it's just because these guys don't have their own tools, they're not really able to create their own game in Seattle. Because it shouldn't be the fans' job to create an amazing, you know, cool, unique setting for an existing IP. That should be something that the devs of themselves over at Bethesda should be raring to do. And I'm gonna kind of sit on this a little bit because Fallout Cascadia is actually a brilliant setting. I mean, one of the things I love the most about the Fallout franchise, and I'm currently playing through the first one right now, the settings themselves are just, that is the reason that people want to play Fallout. It's not a coincidence that all the main Fallout games basically take place in different areas around the country. In Seattle, which is a place I'm very familiar with, it's not just rain and coffee. Especially back then, during any kind of wartime, you know, Washington State especially, it's filled to the brim with military potential and military bases. If you ever do a tour, if you go around the Olympic Peninsula, it has, you know, maybe a 5, 6, 7 defunct military bases that were shut down. They were there because during World War II, they were there to basically defend one of the most valuable and precious and pristine harbors in the United States. And if you know anything about the area, you know there's also Fort Lewis over here, and formerly the Air Base McChord. Now they're kind of combined. But those have been massive, especially when you know in the Fallout lore, there was a massive war in Alaska. What would that have made Washington into? You know, Washington was on the tip there, and I don't remember off the top of my head exactly when in the timeline we annexed Canada, I'm sure it was before, but the potential for like military being there, weird experiments, especially different types of vaults being there. And one of the biggest things is the biodiversity of the Pacific Northwest. And with the kind of Fallout universe, I mean, you could do some interesting stuff with the weather. I believe the Fallout Cascadia, they want to do like a nuclear winter. And it might be interesting to do, you know, you could do all sorts of things. I'm not going to give them suggestions, but if a regular Fallout game came out in Seattle, I mean, why wouldn't you be able to have like radioactive rain, acid rain of some kind, you know, once in a while? There's also very interesting already tensions between the eastern part of the state and the western. And if you know anything about the proposed Cascadia, it's basically a division because there's a giant mountain range in between the state, between east and west, all the way down south to Oregon and parts of northern California. And then it's also bordering Canada. And so if you have kind of factions that are breaking off, that have kind of echoes of what the old world used to be, which is, you know, that would influence the game in a regular Bethesda title, you could definitely have the Eastern Washington basically attacking the Western. You have Canadians there who also obviously probably still hate them a couple hundred years later. There might even be interesting levels of Chinese because of the invasion leaking out from Alaska. And then of course you have Oregon right there, who the only thing dividing them is the Columbia River. And then you have the wildlife, which is of course just the fauna of the area. Very diverse and very dangerous if irradiated. Bears, wolves, especially the sea life there would be, I mean, can you imagine irradiated killer whales? Irradiated orca whales? That would be insane to have to fight that. And it would be perfect because the big thing in Washington is the water. We have massive reserves of fresh water. The Puget Sound is extremely navigable. It is rough, but we use ferries to get across them. We have a bunch of different islands out there. I mean, this place is completely open and free. But yes, of course, the modern devs anywhere, as long as they're not fans, the fans need to be the only ones who actually have any kind of hint of creativity left. Modern devs are basically indistinguishable from federal government drones, and that's coming from someone who works at one of the biggest corporations on Earth. But I think most of these devs are basically unable at a metaphysical level to do any kind of creative activity. Like if a divine being, if God himself, went down and basically said, make an amazing piece of art to these modern devs or I will wipe you out, they could not do it. It is physically impossible. It is metaphysically impossible. They genuinely do not believe that video games are art and that they don't deserve to be art. And they have no stories left to tell. They're basically tumors attached to the shadow of these former greats. And it's the reason why all these games are just getting worse and worse. It is extremely rare that you get like a Doom 2016 where something comes out and actually blows people away. Yeah, nothing's gonna blow people away about the new Fallout, whatever the next game ends up being. They won't have a cool location, they won't do Seattle or Texas or Hawaii. And if they do one of those kind of locations or something unique, they're gonna have the staples there. They gotta have the mascots. They can't have everything be unique and they can't have any new stories to tell. And then don't even get me started on stuff like Gears of War. The end of an apocalyptic war like that, an actual genocide where 99% of the people are dead, in a story about brotherhood and sacrifice, the degradation of that, it's unrecoverable. People from California who don't really like humans at all, they can't imagine a story where after a war like that, things actually look up, and they can't even put themselves in the shoes of like a totalitarian dictatorship, like for real. They can't just romanticize it. That's exactly what they do. They don't have the empathetic ability to put themselves in the shoes of somebody else completely foreign to them. They have sympathy, but not empathy. I mean, who really wanted any of those kind of stories that were given out by the Gears games? It's like a feminist power game or something. Instead, you could be exploring very interesting scenarios and themes. In the lore of the original Gears of War games, I remember they had like breeding farms and stuff. I mean, why would that not be common practice in these games now? It's weird that none of these heroic people, except for maybe Marcus Phoenix, but even him included, these people don't have a bunch of kids. It would not only behoove of these people to have 1 million kids after this war against the Locust. I do want to say, they would basically be doing genetic selection. The COG is not afraid to do very, very pragmatic decisions like forcing people to have children. Especially when you have genetic stock like Coltrane Marcus Phoenix, and especially Baird. These people are not millennials who just want to go tinker in their workshop the rest of their lives and hang out with no kids and their robotic dog, I guess. Like right from the start, the very premise that they had was just insane. And of course, it couldn't just have the story be with new characters. The Gears of the old passing the torch on to the Gears of the new. It wasn't really like that. You had to have Marcus Phoenix around with you everywhere because, of course, that's their mascot. They can't come with anything else can be new. And it's just completely exhausting. And no, I won't be buying their prequel. It looks retarded. I guess I'm just glad that the technology exists for people who are actually inspired to tell their stories. And it is kind of interesting that we live in the kind of Metal Gear Solid 2 timeline, where AI and the internet have kind of completely flooded everybody's body and soul. And it is kind of funny that we could actually rebuild this industry if we really, really wanted. But people just don't want to face the truth. They'll sit here and cope about how it's never been better because the amount of pixels on the screen has never been higher. I can't think of a game that I've played in the last, 5 years that's actually stuck with me. I still think about a lot of the games I played as a kid, and it wasn't just because I was younger, but it's because I was being told universal truths. These were given to me through very unique and interesting and, of course, edgy games. And this is probably one of the biggest things I don't like, and it's the most obvious sign of corporatization, is just how cowardly these games are. Does anybody expect GTA 6 to be edgy? Actually edgy, Like, they're gonna have the, gay pride parade, apparently, according to leaks. And of course, you know exactly what people want to do as soon as they hear that news. Guarantee that'll be basically impossible, and then mods will pop up about a week, maybe not even that, to remove whatever safeguards because you can't commit a hate crime. And it's funny because Rockstar is actually based in England. I'm pretty sure if they allowed you to do that, they might all get arrested. Pretty sure, and I may make a video on this because I kind of The way I kind of decide videos is I just find something that's kind of interesting and I talk about it, at least interesting to me, of course. But GTA 6 is basically be a gigantic litmus and IQ test on the population. And it's crazy because these people, everybody's so sure, the entire industry is so sure that this will be a massive success. And it's like, I guarantee it's going to be less edgy and less creative than GTA 5. But of course, because the graphics will be decent, like maybe we'll be able to see the sweat on the people because you're in Florida, oh my God. And the rumors that it'll be $100, I mean, I would not buy this for $100 if someone offered to, buy it for me. I would tell them to save their money. I want no part of this. I'm not an idiot who's going to be paying $100 for a game before I even know if it's going to be good. But the funny thing is, I wonder if the original creators of GTA were somehow teleported with that same mindset and youth and vigor and ability to actually make it, because again, they are in the UK. What kind of game would those guys make from the 90s? What would they make if they had the tech and the ability today? I don't know if I wish exactly for a crash per se, because I think we're basically already in a great gaming depression. I don't know how much lower it can get from here except for gigantic studios to go under, but I mean, they already basically have. They're all being bought by these conglomerates and the old history of gaming made by these absolute legends and chads being erased before our very eyes as the quote-unquote modern audience claps like seals and says good riddance, all because the polygon count wasn't high enough. I am actually offended when they announce a new remake, no matter basically what it is. I don't need a high definition version of the Mona Lisa to actually appreciate that it is art. They're basically just burning down cathedrals and replacing them with a parking lot. It's a crime against humanity for the most part, but I'll bring it around full circle. I mean, I don't know where these people got their inspiration, and it's impressive because I also think about our own founding fathers in the country, especially this being the 250th year, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The kind of people I think are just objectively, mainly due to the lack of technology. It seems like these people were just different. They were just a different breed, and they had a different mindset about people. I don't really understand why, because it wasn't really about money, why these Japanese developers would be making these crazy, obscure, Gnostic games and, these terrifying Silent Hill games that even today they creep me out. They would develop these studios basically out of nothing. Pun intended, basically just for the love of the game. And they would just effortlessly throw these things out of their brains, mix it with the technology, guide whoever the devs were into creating exactly what they wanted to the nth degree. And when you have the corporate head honchos coming down telling them they need to ship the game or add whatever to it, they would be told to fuck off. Emphatically so. I think a lot of the creators, what they may have in common, they were willing to basically die, and they, a lot of these guys did literally, they spent their blood, sweat, and literal tears over the keyboards to make these things for us. And again, I ask everybody who kind of listens to this, I mean, where, what, how did this wellspring appear? I don't know how to kind of bring this back. Honestly, I don't think we can. I think, there was even a wellspring for philosophy. There was a wellspring for great literature. Post-World War I, I mean, where is our generation's Lord of the Rings? Closest thing would be like Harry Potter, and it's just like the most simplistic normie book on earth. The things we get now are basically as deep as a puddle. And the older I get, the more depth I want. And I don't get any catharsis from any of these quote-unquote pieces of art that are being made by my generation. And I kind of panic when I think about what the next generation will kind of have. And I don't know, I guess this might just be the kind of endless cycle where a new kind of entertainment comes out. I'm sure back for the ancient Greeks, they were experiencing this same thing with their niche kind of entertainment. Maybe for them it was pottery or Greco-Roman wrestling or philosophy or plays, where these people kind of came out and created a culture using their own mind and will. And then the normie crowd and of course the state, they come in and they just ruin it for everybody. And it becomes irrelevant until the next form of entertainment comes around. And so maybe what I have to do in my future generations, what they'll have to do is just wait around for their chance to experience the next outlet of human creativity and human entertainment. The next kind of tech that comes along that kind of brings everything together the way video games did. And I do gotta say, I gotta thank the developers back then who I played, I didn't understand a lot of it at first because I was very young, but the seeds were planted in my head for great art. I've always loved reading as well. I've always loved music. I've always loved movies. And it's kind of funny because as I became an adult, now especially, I really like philosophy. And I look back and it's like, the seeds were planted for me to actually love all those by video games. By these random guys from across the world who, they ended up meeting each other, but they didn't come from the same place. But they all had the same desire to kind of nuke the minds of the next generations with baseness. And that's kind of the power of art, and it's exactly why the gaming industry was taken over. Because video games are the kind of meeting point, the focal point of all these different types of art. Art, and especially entertainment, are just the most effective propaganda that exists. And so I do gotta say thank you to those people, and I definitely will, especially the Japanese. I grew up basically on a lot of Nintendo, but mainly JRPGs on the PlayStation. And some of those weird survival horror games, I don't know if it's been made, I might try to look it up later, but someone's gotta make a video on the relationship between the Japanese and the Americans, especially post-war. I feel like there's always been a fascination between our two cultures where they kind of idealize us in their art and we 100% idealize them. This love affair goes back, over 100 years. The Americans, of course, we were the ones who brought them into, by force, of course, with a ship with cannons and US Marines. We forced them to be a part of the kind of global empire that was being built, the global colonial empire, and the hyper competency of the Japanese. Like I said, I might have to make a video on this. I love the history of that. And of course, it's culminating for me in these guys' descendants, especially, comes to mind Sakaguchi, of course, again, because Final Fantasy was such a large part of my childhood. Especially when you look at things like Final Fantasy VII, where a lot of the other ones were kind of fantasy, but then you kind of get this Gnostic occultism on Final Fantasy VII, where there's literal cults online still revolving around Final Fantasy VII, and it's just such a weird world. And, that was just another day in the office for them, mixing this into their beautiful concoction and just throwing it out there. And of course, me, I love Halo. Getting that exact mixture of men together who could actually make something like that, the absolutely beautiful music, the amazing art style, the ambition, and that game design, the shooting design, the golden triangle, the level design for the most part. And of course, they were right on the edge, the bleeding edge of being basically one-shotted by corporate interference and idiotic deadlines. And of course, now that the corporations own these games, they give themselves, which, Halo Studios and all these other studios, and not just them, they are the corporation that they're owned by. Of course, they give themselves, 4, 5, 6 years when they used to give the original creators maybe 2, 3 if they're lucky, and severe punishments to their bonuses if they don't meet these arbitrary deadlines. That's kind of the cosmic injustice that was done to these men, was that they were not in full control of their vision for the most part. I think that's why the Japanese were dominating so much back then, is because they were more in control and they were much more of a honor culture. And so they knew if, besides going out of business, of course, if back then they failed, but the people who were the heads of the studios, they would take pay cuts for their employees. And if it really did fail, they would jump on the knife as a figure of speech, but they would axe themselves instead of passing the blame. And look at where we are now. That would never happen today. No head of a studio will willingly give up their job because they objectively failed. They will fire everyone else, and then hopefully, if the gods of the time are just, they might get a pay cut or a golden parachute to be kicked out. But most likely they'll just fail upwards to the next whatever head of a whatever studio. But I do appreciate everybody who's listening to this as well. I promise not all of my videos are negative. And I didn't really mean for this to be negative. I just saw the Fallout Cascadia and I just thought that idea alone of setting a game in Seattle and the echoes of a past war like that being brought forward for us to play, especially me living there. I have a million ideas for a game like that. And it sucks because I got to sit on the sidelines. I don't have the skills to create a game. And I'm hoping that these guys, these fans, do a good job. I've read a little bit of the Fallout wiki for them, and some of their concepts are pretty good. And I wish them all the luck, but the health of the industry is not really through indie or fan developers. It's objectively judged by kind of how the mainstream of the industry is doing it. And it's very foreign for people, especially who are pretty young, younger than me especially, to know that, there were masterpieces were basically all over the place growing up. And we had lost that kind of ability or desire even to strive for just general greatness just for the sake of it. Of course, these guys wanted to make money, but people like Sakaguchi, I mean, when he was in charge, they would have never, and they did never, make a sequel to any of their games. It wasn't until after he basically was kicked out or, took the fall for the movie that they went in and did Final Fantasy X-2. And that was basically the downfall of that entire franchise or that entire IP. And look where they are now, making Final Fantasy VII remakes. I mean, that's just an abomination to the original vision in every conceivable way. And of course, the dude who did the art direction or the character portraits, Nomura, like he's now being given credit for all of the work that was done by people who just they literally mentored him. And he would basically be a homeless person on the street, most likely. I mean, he is a talented artist, for sure. But it's just insane to me where we are now. I don't really recognize it. Anyway, if you listened this far, I really do appreciate it. If you have like a favorite developer from the golden age of gaming, I would love to hear about it. Even an amazing studio, I mean, off the top of my head, I think of Blizzard, and I want to keep it up, where they were one of my favorites of all time. They were just insane. Everything they touched turned to gold. And it just sucks to see how far everything has fallen. But I do have a little tinge of hope. I think everything can be rebuilt. And so cheers to that, guys, and cheers to you. See ya.